faculty members at the economics faculty here. Welcome everybody to the real conference. And it's good to see some people, at least for this. I'm sure people will start trickling in gradually. So the first session is on poverty. As you know, it's on your schedule, and it's going to be chaired by Professor Manoj Panda, who is the director of the Institute of Economic Growth here in New Delhi. So Professor Panda, I'll now hand it over to you. Just one quick thing. From now on, we have actually blocked access from this door here. So if you need to go out, there's another door at the back. You can use that. Okay, Professor Panda.
Yeah, thank you, Anirban, and good morning to all of you. You know, the tone for this session has already been set in the previous session. Why do we need to talk about this topic? I'll just say that, you know, South Asia, again on the poverty front, the outcome in different South Asian countries had been very different. The poverty ratio ranges from 4 to 5% in Sri Lanka to 25-30% in few other countries. But today's papers, they do take us into different areas of different aspects of poverty: food security, nutrition, and even, you know, international comparison of some of the poverty issues. So I'll not go further into any introduction. I'll straightforward go to the paper presentation. I have been told that not more than 18 minutes for each presentation. So I'll request around 15-16 minutes for each person. Certainly not more than 18. And then each discussant after the 4 presentations will take about 10 minutes each. That will leave us some time for discussion. So may I request now Andalip, you know, he is going to start with a paper which is on a region which is possibly one of the poorest in the entire South Asia.
Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be the first presenter at the South Asia Conference, given that I have intimate history with the South Asia. My father was educated in Dhaka, and my extended family lives across Islamabad, Lahore, and Karachi. I'm an Indian, but my name is derived from a Bangladeshi poet's name. So that's sort of history. This work was done as a part of my PhD thesis at Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, Bombay. This looks at the role of public distribution and improving nutrition intake. So nutrition can have multiple meanings in terms of how you access water, clean water, sanitation, maternal malnutrition. Here what I'm looking at the nutrient intake, the most elementary form of how you measure nutrition. And I'm looking at the KBK districts in Odisha, the hunger prone districts, and one of the worst in terms of poverty in India. How generally people measure the impact of food assistance program like PDS on nutritional impact is through the impact the income transfer or the consumer subsidies these have as increase in income that they have. So people have questioned how the price subsidies that reaches people, how they use in terms of changing their diet. Do they consume more of the staple food, or they change towards consumption of more other cereals like pulses or like egg, fish, and meat? The existing literature and the link between in-kind food transfer and nutrition has come up with inconclusive results. The main paper, Jensen and Miller, did an experiment in two provinces of China and found that in-kind food transfer does not has an effect on nutritional intake. Shimokawa paper in China also finds a similar result. One of the reasons why they do not find a conclusive result is because of the setting. They say it depends on where you measure this impact on. In the paper of Jensen and Miller, they found that the region where they surveyed was not the poorest of the poor population, and that is why they may not have found an impact. It is not that they established, they say that it might be because the reason they're not the poorest of the poor, the nutritional impact is not found. And there's income substitution effect. For example, people can use those implicit income transfer to consume more of the same food, like rice and wheat in case of India, or they might choose to consume more of edible oil or pulses. So this is the question that I'm trying to test using Odisha as my case study. To give you a background of PDS, it includes the whole process of procurement, storage, and distribution of food grains, especially rice and wheat in India. It's an immensely debated issue where the issues of targeting errors, like identifying the right people to give the subsidy to, there are leakages involved right in the stage of storing to transit, and at the end at the PDS distributor level as well, where they sell it to other players. And the fiscal burden involved, since it happens at such a massive scale that there are huge fiscal issues involved. The major breakthrough initiatives in the PDS has been in 1992 when the government started targeting towards the poorer areas, and in 1997 it was made a targeted scheme from a universal scheme. A 2005 report by the Planning Commission found the PDS subsidy does not reach the poor, and there has been no reduction in the food subsidy as well. Of late, in the past decade, we have seen a revival of the PDS. There has been spirited initiatives by the various state governments who have taken it upon themselves to improve the provision of PDS to people. And watershed movement was the 2013 National Food Security Act, which entitles a large share of the population to the subsidized PDS. Just a brief figure on what has changed over time. We can see that Himachal Pradesh and Tamil Nadu has been the leaders in terms of PDS performance. But when you look at the poorer states like Odisha, Chhattisgarh, they have improved a lot in the last 10, 15 years. And that is where the whole story lies. So the focus of this paper is Odisha, which is widely known for the high level of malnutrition and mortality. The International Food Policy Research Institute's report on India's State Hunger Index finds the state of hunger in the state alarming. An important feature of the poor malnutrition status in the state is regional disparity. The KBK district, the Kalahandi, Balangir, Koraput districts, which are widely famous for malnutrition deaths and to hunger, have been an issue. So what the government in Odisha did, they moved towards a more IT-based system where there was end-to-end computerization. They had to send SMS to people in the locality when the ration reached their shop. They employed the GPS device to the trucks which were carrying the grain so that people can track whether it gets lost or not. They also gave incentives to the fair price shop dealers, the FPS, who through cooperatives, they made self-help groups. The expansion of the coverage also made it more remunerative for the ration shop owners to sell, and their profits rose. All this was done to reduce the leakage and the cost involved. And more important was the lowering of the issue price. The issue price was generally set by the central government. They lowered it to 2 rupees a kilo for the BPL households. And the change that happened, which is being exploited in this paper to find out the impact of PDS and nutrition, is the universal coverage of the PDS in KBK districts. While the rest of the Odisha had a targeted PDS, the KBK districts were moved towards a universal PDS for all households regardless of the APL or BPL category in 2008. And these 8 KBK districts out of the 30 districts in Odisha are contiguous districts to the south of the state. The characteristics of the rural are they're primarily rural, they're large percentage of SC and ST households, it is inaccessible in terms of lack of road availability, they're also affected by Naxal violence, poor nutrition status as manifested in the high levels of mortality and hunger, and 60% is the poverty level in these regions given from the national and sample survey data, recent 2011-12. So the research questions that I'm trying to address here, after the PDS became a universal scheme in the KBK districts, did it lead to or translate into higher nutrient intake by the households? Has there been a shift to greater consumption of non-cereals? Because the big debate on nutrition carries on not only consumption of cereals, but the portfolio of diet that you consume. That's an important part of improved nutritional intake. And the third is, are households moving closer to the recommendatory dietary allowance? This is the Indian Council for Medical Research, RDA, what they fix based upon the person's gender, occupation, and age. So these are the three research questions. The existing evidence of the link between PDS and nutritional intake in India has again been mixed. Like this paper by Kocher exploits the change in the PDS from being a universal scheme to a targeted scheme in 1997, finds that there's no effect on calorie intake. But the problem was this: they looked at the earlier states which consumed wheat, and much of the improvement in PDS has taken place in states which are primarily rice consuming, like Tamil Nadu, Chhattisgarh, and Odisha, and they find no effect. The other paper by Kaushal and Muchamba looks at both the rice and wheat consuming states, and they find that though the calorie intake hasn't changed, households have shifted to greater consumption of coarse cereals. And this paper by Krishnamurthy et al. Looks at the recent PDS reforms in Chhattisgarh, and they do find that overall calorie intake though remains unchanged, but there's been improvement in the diet quality. Diet quality as measured in the portfolio of food groups that they consume, like cereals, non-cereals, pulses, edible oil, which I'll tell you as I go along. The data that I use is the National Sample Survey data, the 2004-5 and 2011-12, both are representative at the district level. I exploit the variation, the change or the intervention that happened in 2008 in the KBK districts. This household survey has the information on quantity and expenditure on different food items, which can be clubbed into major food categories. And I can get the calorie from the Gopalan et al., which is the standard calorie consumption charts in India. So when you look at the average PDS rice consumption, in KBK districts 2004-5, 8.9 kg per household was the average consumption of rice. I'm looking at rice because Odisha is the rice consuming state. In 2011-12, it increased to 20 kg per head. For the non-KBK districts, it is lower than the KBK districts. But when you look at the Antyodaya, AAY, the Antyodaya category, there's not much difference over time. For the BPL, you see an increase in the non-KBK districts as well as the KBK districts. But the biggest change has been the APL, because it's become a universal scheme now, everybody can access it. And there, like from 6.4 kg per household, it has increased to almost 22 kg per household. And when you translate into income transfer, which is calculated at the price difference between the PDS issue price and the market price into the quantity consumed by the household, it translates. So the Antyodaya households are now getting close to 500 rupees per month as an implicit income transfer. The BPL households 411. But there's not marked difference between the non-KBK and KBK districts for the Antyodaya and BPL category. But there's a huge shift in the APL category, again because of the universal scheme there. When you look at the average nutrient intake, KBK districts has a lower consumption of calories, as the high, like malnutrition is high, nutrient intake is low, but it has overchanged with time. In terms of all these categories like calories, proteins and fats, non-cereal intake too has changed over time. When we look at the difference during these two time periods and test its statistical significance, we find that in Odisha overall there has been an increase in the calorie intake for BPL households, not for the non-BPL households. In KBK district, this is much more higher, like 237 kilocalorie per day per person in the KBK districts, and this increase has not been much for the non-KBK districts. When we go to the calorie sources, the portfolio of diet that we have, pulses, eggs, fish and meat, dairy products, these all you again see a market change in the KBK districts. When we look at the households, percentage of households which are consuming calories, proteins and fats below the recommendatory dietary allowance, the ICMR guidelines, again we see a large percentage of households are consuming below their recommendatory intake across the income distribution. These are the 4 MPC decile classes, the expenditure classes. You see they are consuming much less than what is warranted. It is based upon the age, gender and the, so it varies. I don't, in 2009 NIN recommend, yeah, those recommendations. So the objective, oops, sorry. No. So the objective now is to whether these differences that exist are statistically true in terms of the change can be attributed to PDS being universalized in these districts or not. So what I do is take a user difference in difference approach where there's been a change in 2008. I have the data prior to it and post the intervention in for terms of being a universal scheme. The non-KBK districts act as my control group, while treatment group are the KBK districts. So my regression has the interaction term between the dummy, which is the TD for the KBK and non-KBK, and TI is the time. So whether it has changed over time. I have the control variables, social groups, religion, household, land holdings, durable assets, and their district fixed effects. So what I find is that overall, when you look at the OLS results, overall calorie intake post the intervention in the KBK districts has increased by 7%. The intake of protein has increased by 7% as well. The consumption of fat has increased by 11%. The non-cereals has increased by 20%. Pulses, you see a 42% increase. Vegetables and fruits, again 33% increase, and edible oil 27%. Since the mean estimates might not exactly show the true picture, we go and do the quantile difference in difference estimates. We again find the poorest people at the poorest quantiles have benefited the most in the KBK districts after it changed to a universal PDS scheme. Again, I did a DID estimate for the, so by outcome variable, here's the ratio between the intake and the recommendatory dietary along the ICMR guidelines. And again, I see people are 5% closer in terms of their calorie requirement towards the RDA norms in terms of calorie. For protein, 6.37%. On the mean, I don't find any significant result for fat, but at the bottom quantile, there is almost 3% closure to the RDA norms. So one might say that these things might be a statistical artifact and cannot be attributed to PDS being universal itself. So I go back and take the 99-2000 data of NSS and check for whether the same trends followed or not. We find it the same trend, like there's no change in the calorie intake and protein intake between 99-2000 and 2004-05 using the NSS. So this sort of says that the results are not statistical artifact, they have some thing there. As another measure of cross-checking whether it holds or not, I take some, like 27% of the households, even in the KBK districts, do not have a ration card. So I take them as a control group and treatment group as the households who have a ration card in the KBK districts itself. And again, I find protein intake has increased, calorie intake has increased by 12%, protein by 10%, and fat by 20%. The consumption of non-cereals also increased, and pulses. Similar ratio of nutrient intake to RDA has increased as well. This regression talks about how a BPL households in KBK district is different from a BPL households in non-KBK districts. Because when we look at the first table, the BPL households in both these regions are pretty similar in terms of the average consumption from PDS. And I don't find much effect. So this basically says being a BPL households in KBK and non-KBK district does not have much of an effect in terms of your calorie and protein intake after the changes happened. But this ratio has certainly improved. So to conclude, the in-kind food transfer has led to increase in the nutrient intake in the KBK region. There is a shift towards a more diversified portfolio of diets with a high percentage of people consuming pulses, edible oils as well as eggs, fish and meat. People are moving closer towards the recommendatory dietary allowance. These results contrast with the earlier studies. It might be because the magnitude of subsidy is much more higher right now than it was earlier. It's a universal PDS, which was never earlier, like before 97, but not tested. And the setting, like these districts are amongst the poorest of the poor in India, so we might be the reason we find it. Thanks.
You completed on time. I didn't have to remind you. Next speaker, Tariq Masood. We'll have all the presentations after that.
morning to all of you. I think my paper, its title is title of my paper is Are Microfinance Institutions Drifting Away from Original Mission? Empirical Evidences from South Asia. I think the paper is quite different from other papers in the session. They are directly related with the research on poverty, but it is about microfinance institutions. So the work is at institution level. Now, for this research work, first we must know about the original mission of the microfinance. What is the original mission of the microfinance? The original mission of microfinance, basically it has two parts. First is to target poor, target marginalized section, poor women and poor clients, and the next is to make significant dent on the poverty. Okay, so make some effect on the lives of the poor. First part is targeting efficiency. Now, in most of the cases, microfinance are believing on self-targeting mechanism. So they didn't have any targeting approach. They simply believe that self-targeting mechanism will work. Okay? So self-targeting mechanism is going to work. They believe on this principle. Now, if we look at the path adopted by the microfinance, the route adopted for this purpose, so there are two approaches. First approach is known as poverty lending approach. Now, poverty lending or welfareist approach. The prime goal of this approach is to target the poorest of the poor client, and they does not depend upon subsidies or grants. They justify that subsidies and grants are needed for the functioning of institution. They do not believe in the commercialization. Okay, the form of this institution is mainly NGO. They are a non-governmental organization, then cooperative societies and other various other forms. Now next approach, next route of microfinance is financial sustainability or institutionalist approach. Now in this approach, the approach favors strongly financial sustainability of the institution. Okay, so they are working on commercial principles. They are getting resources, they are getting financial revenues from the commercial sources, and they believe that microfinance institution must free themselves from any subsidy or grant. Okay, so they are working on commercial principles. Now, form of these institutions, they are mostly they are non-banking financial companies. Few of them are banks or micro banks. Okay, they are mostly they are regulated institutions. So regulation is other form of commercialization. These regulated institutions are accessing commercial funding and they are working on commercial line. Okay. Now debate is, there is a great debate between the proponents of these two approaches. Okay. Now there is a middle ground which promotes middle path. Okay. It promotes balancing of these two goals. Okay. So they think that commercialization, there is compatibility between these two things. There is compatibility between commercialization and targeting of poor client. So basically I am trying to test this hypothesis whether there is compatibility between these two things or not. First research question is there trade-off between financial performance of these institutions and poverty outreach and depth of outreach? Is there compatibility between these two objectives? Now if you look at the past literature, you will find that there is little work on this particular topic related to South Asia. Most of the work is either Latin American or cross-country research. Okay, so I tried to focus on South Asian context because microfinance in South Asia is completely different from microfinance in Latin America or North African countries. Now quality of data used in past research is one issue. Most of the studies use cross-sectional data. Okay, so there is a scope to use panel data for the research. Now, suitability of indicators, the indicators which have been used in the past for poverty level at institution, at microfinance institution level, and also performance of these institutions can be modified. Okay, there is still some scope to use better indicators for the poverty outreach of these microfinance institutions and also financial performance of these institutions. Now, research related to South Asia on this particular topic is rather absent, so there is urgent need to do this. Now, empirical specification of the model. The study adopted panel data regression framework for this objective. A panel data regression model, as you all know, can be expressed as y as a function of x, and then ui is a microfinance institution individual unobserved effect, and ei is a random effect. Now, problem with the fixed effect is fixed effect model rules out inclusion of time invariant variable. So, we can't include time invariant variable in the model, but in our model there are many time invariant qualitative determinants of the average loan size. The next is random effect model. Random effect model allows inclusion of time invariant variables. It is based on the assumption that explanatory variables are uncorrelated with the unobserved microfinance institution term. Okay. Now, there is case to believe that managerial quality or many other unobserved characteristics are related with the microfinance or other explanatory variables. Okay. So, there is a strong case to believe that there is violation of one assumption of random effect model. So, next is Hausman-Taylor model. Now, we adopted Hausman-Taylor framework for estimation of our panel data regression model. Now, in Hausman-Taylor model, we can express yi as a function of x1 and x2, where x1 is time invariant exogenous variable and then time variant exogenous variable. So, we can divide our exogenous and endogenous variables into two parts. Okay. Now, assumptions behind Hausman-Taylor regression model. There must be sufficient correlation between time invariant endogenous variables and time varying exogenous variable model. Now, next assumption is there the number of time varying exogenous variables must be at least as large as the number of time invariant endogenous variables. Now, next, the Hausman-Taylor model works best in case of sufficient correlation between time varying exogenous variables and time invariant endogenous variables. So, we tested for all these assumptions in our data. Now, variables included in the model, I think it is less visible. Now, first, dependent variable. The dependent variable is proxy for depth of outreach. Now, depth of outreach, first variable we use is average loan size. Average loan size is most commonly used indicator of poverty indicator of microfinance institution. It is believed that if a loan size is small, that means there is better outreach of that institution, because poor need small loans. Okay, so they did not take large loan from the institution. So if the loan size is small, that means there is better outreach of the institution, better depth of outreach of the institution. So first we use average loan size as a indicator of poverty outreach of institution, and then second is share of female borrowers, share of women borrowers. Okay, so one objective of microfinance is basically to target women client. So this is one indicator of better poverty outreach of institution, share of female borrowers. Now, independent variables, financial performance variables, indicators for commercialization of the institution. The first indicator is return on asset. It is same on the line of formal banking. Return on asset as one indicator of commercialization. And then next, we also use operational self-sufficiency of these institutions as a measure of financial orientation. Now, other explanatory variables, we also included various other determinants: size of the institution, age of the institution, and number of active borrowers of the institution. Then next category is time invariant qualitative determinants of loan size or female borrowers. Okay, so qualitative determinants are regulatory status of microfinance institution, whether institution is a regulated institution or unregulated institution, and then also profit status of the institution. Few institutions are working for profit status. Okay, they are basically working on the line of profit status. So we included one variable as profit status of the institution. Now, exogenous time invariant variables are country-specific dummies, that is Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Pakistan. Okay, then and Sri Lanka. Now, exogenous time variant variables are macroeconomic indicators of the country. First variable is size of the economy, GDP per capita, which is some measure of proxy measure of poverty level of the country. Now, next is GDP growth rate, and female labor force participation is also one determinant of this. Now coming to the data, the major source of data, because we can discuss briefly. Okay? Now, statistics related to microfinance institutions are widely scattered, so it is really difficult to get data at institution level. So there is one site of World Bank which is known as Mixed Market. So we collected data at microfinance institution level from that website, Mixed Market. And for microeconomic indicators, we collected data from World Bank Development Indicators, WDI. Now our sample is quite heterogeneous in terms of size of the institution, age of the institution, and various other dimensions. Though the number of institutions included in the study is small, we included 69 institutions from the region. So in terms of number, it is small. But when we look at in terms of outreach, in terms of number of active borrowers, then this is quite large. Now this is correlation between endogenous time invariant and exogenous time variant variables. I think this is. Now coming to results. Now first regression result shows that there is significant trade-off between poverty outreach and commercial orientation. So there is no compatibility between these two objectives. Though the institutions which are becoming commercially oriented, they are diverting away from the mission of poverty outreach. Now the average loan size of a profit-oriented and regulated microfinance institution is significantly higher than their counterpart. So for-profit institutions are diverting away from the original mission. Now next finding, the average loan size is large in all other South Asian countries in comparison to India. Okay, so in India, the average loan size is small. Poverty outreach is better in case of India. Now further, it is found that there is inverse relation between per capita overall poverty level and poverty level of microfinance institution. Now in next table, most of the conclusions are same. Now when we use female share as one objective of microfinance institution, we find that higher share of female is generally seen as better poverty outreach. So we find that targeting of women client as the core mission of microfinance, we can argue that commercialization is contributing towards this goal. Okay? So commercially oriented microfinance institutions are targeting more female clients. So this is in contrast with the earlier finding. They are diverting away from the poor client, but they are targeting more female clients. The share of female client is found to be lowest in India. If we take profit orientation of institution as a qualitative measure of commercial orientation, it can be concluded that these institutions are serving more female clients. Now conclusions, by using average loan size, we find that there is trade-off. Commercial oriented, profit oriented, and regulated institutions are diverting away from their original mission. Now NGO or cooperative societies, they are sticking to the original mission, but commercial institutions are diverting away from the original mission. Now commercialization is helping these institutions in serving more female clients. Okay, so this is positive finding, that commercialization is helping in getting more female clients. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for an interesting paper and also doing it on time. The next paper is by Krishna Ram.
First of all, I like to say good morning to all of you, especially my teachers from both Jawaharlal Nehru University and Delhi School of Economics. So, basically, I'm going to present topic which is on calorie consumption puzzle. And this study is based on empirical study based on national and international data set since 90. Finding of this study are related with the poverty debate in India. So, as you all know about the calorie consumption debate in India, there were intense calorie consumption debate. Okay. If you talk about the trends and figures, of course, in later part I will talk about the trends and figures. But in 2090 during 1990 2009, as all we know, India has witnessed a very peculiar trend, and that one is the declining in per capita calorie consumption along with rise in per capita real income. However, in 2011 and 12 survey, there were evidence in rise of per capita calorie consumption. There are various explanations for this, which we broadly categorize into voluntary reduction and involuntary reduction. In voluntary reductions, there is an argument given by Hanmantan Roy, Dayton and Rich, like mechanization, automation and electrification of work reduces physical activity and hence calorie need. The second argument given by Radhakrishna Rao, Hong and David, Aldrich and Rebellion, that diversification of consumption basket to non-cereal items, particularly of which people were not aware about, is a causes of decline of calorie consumption. The third one is the cultural density, which prevent the consumption of high calorie Western food habit. Involuntary reductions, there were argument given by particularly Usha Patnaik, Basu and Bhosle, Gaya and Jha and Kulkarni, like rise in price of cereal and non-cereals item, particularly health, education, transport cost, in absence of sufficient rise in nominal income, reduces purchasing capacity of large section of population, and the same one is reflecting into a declining in per capita calorie consumption. If I talk about the argument particularly given by Usha Patnaik, then she argued that declining in per capita calorie consumption is basically a caused by a declining in real income, per capita real income. And to calculate this declining in per capita real income, she constructed her own implicit price deflator, which one is largely known as calorie invariant price deflator. Okay. But the problem with that approach, that one is based on assumption of taking cereal consumption as a proxy for real income. I will talk about this one later in my work. The second one is the incomplete collection of data relating to food consumed away from home leads to downward bias in estimates of calorie consumption, as it is a substitute for food consumed at home and also rising over a period of time. Now I am going to again move to the Usha Patnaik argument. Against the Usha Patnaik argument, okay, taking a different positions, D10 and DH argue that cereal या calorie consumptions cannot be taken as a proxy for real income, as it doesn't have very strong relationship with cereal consumption, with real income. Sorry, they argue that as cereal consumption depend upon several other factors besides real income, such as mechanization, activity pattern, body weight, water supply, epidemiological environment, demographic composition of people, that too affect the cereal consumption. So it is not appropriate to take cereal consumption as a proxy for real income. However, a exhaustive empirical exercise again done by me, taking a data set of 85 countries over a period of 1990 to 2007, shows that given that cereal consumption depend upon several other things, there is a very strong associationship between cereal consumption and income. And given this strong relationship, we can take serial consumption as a proxy for real income. In this context, basically this is this work, today presentation is my attempt to re-examine this relationship again, taking a data set of 128 countries over a period of 1990 to 2011. Apart from this, we also look the implication of the finding all calorie consumption debate in India, and it also investigate the causes of recent rise in calorie consumption. Objective of this paper is there a strong association between the calorie consumption and real income, even with the larger set of data, whether real consumption can be used as a proxy for real income, or is there a strong causal relationship between income and nutrition. For this, I have taken a full data set of 128 countries for a period 1990 to 2011. FAO data sets provide a serial consumptions, which includes both here direct and indirect. Direct cereal, direct cereal we can measure here cereal excluding beer used as a food. For indirect cereal consumptions, animal feed resulting from the diversifications to animal product. I have used the two alternative methods to calculate indirect cereal consumption. The first one is indirect cereal consumption. I have calculated per capita meat consumption multiplied by 4. And in the second method, I have alternatively I have calculated indirect cereal consumption feed plus net import of meat multiplied by 4. Okay. The second method I have added later. Actually, the same paper I was presented in CSP Young Scholar Seminar, where Arindam Banerjee was a discussant. So he was suggested me that the figure 4, which one I use as a cereal conversion ratio, overestimated for the developing country and underestimated for the developed country. So what I have tried to use, for indirect cereal consumption I have taken per capita feed consumptions plus net import of meat, which one is the import minus export multiplied by 4. For reason of taking 4 is that cereal consumptions to meat vary with the different kind of livestock, like bovine, pig, poultry and goat. And in case of bovine, and I'm not sure, I'm just somewhere I have read 12 kg of cereal required to produce 1 kg of meat. For pig and goat, 3 to 4 kg of cereal required to produce meat. For poultry it is below 2 kg. So I'm just taking a simple rough average of this, and that's come to 4. Okay. And the one reason of taking 4 is that Usha Patnaik has used this figure 4 as a cereal conversion ratio. So for real income, I have taken a World Bank estimates of per capita GDP, measured in purchasing power parity, constant in 2011 US dollar. For calories, protein and fat, I have used the NSSO data set for 58th, 61st, 66th and 68th round. Of course, 65th round of NSSO data set has not been used because of comparability problem. This one is the graph of per capita total cereal consumptions against per capita real income. In this graph, I have used the first method, where indirect cereal consumptions was calculated meat multiplied by 4. So total cereal consumption here, direct cereal consumption plus indirect cereal consumption. You look at the figure, it shows some kind of non-linearity pattern. Of course, UAE, Brunei and Darussalam and Norway are the countries who have high per capita real income but comparatively low level of total cereal consumptions. To estimate the regression result, I have used 4 different kind of regression. The first one is the log-log model, the second one is quadratic polynomial model, the third one is the Gompertz model, the fourth one is logistic model, and fifth one is again log-log model. I have used to estimate panel regression result. Dependent variable is a total cereal consumption, and independent variable one is a real income. Gompertz and logistic model is a non-linear regression model, and the rest one is a linear regression model. estimation procedure used for linear regression model, ordinary OLS method has been used, and for non-linear regression model, Gauss-Newton iterative linearization technique has been used. The assumption of this paper is if two variables have monotonic relationship, then one can be used as a proxy for other, provided there is a no parametric shift, and what hold for the country aggregate should hold same for group within a country. This one is a descriptive statistics of total serial consumption, serial meat and total serial consumptions to per capita real income across various income groups. So here you have seen I have divided in countries according to their income: high income OECD country, high income non-OECD country, upper middle income country, lower middle income country. Here you look direct serial consumption. Direct serial consumption is declining as per capita income will rise, but meat rise secularly, and similarly with the total serial consumption. Okay. The countries are classified as according to the World Bank list of country classification 2014. Now come to the regression result. This one is the pooled regression result with log-log model, quadratic, comparison, logistic model. With log-log model, beta 2 is a slope coefficient. Similarly with the quadratic polynomial model, in comparison logistic model, beta 1 is the saturation level of serial consumption, beta 2 1 is the slope. You look, all the slope coefficient has a positive have positive sign and also statistically significant. Saturation level of serial consumption, which one is denoted by beta 1 in case of comparison logistic functions, where 455 and 553 kg per person in a year with comparison logistic model respectively. But R square, we are getting a very high R square, which range between 6.64 to 0.66. Again with the larger number of observations, 2794 observations. And this one is the fitted graph. You can look, when I take a log transformation of the variable, we have a positive relationship, and these three are the variable as in their absolute form. Similarly, I do for the cross-sectional regression result, taking a average for 1990 to 2011-12. Again, you are getting a similar kind of result where all slope coefficients have a significant sign, and also a saturation level of serial consumptions range between 456 to 451. Again, you are getting a very high R square. This one is again a fitted graph, similar to the previous one. The only difference is here you have a lesser number of dots as compared to the earlier one. Now this one is the panel fixed effect result. Okay. Again in panel fixed effect result, beta 2 is a slope coefficient and beta 1 is the intercept term. 0.16 means if there is a rise in 1% in real income, 0.16% rise in total serial consumption. Again you are getting a very high statistically significant value. R square within is 0.27, between is 0.65. Okay. Okay. Again I am reminding you here total serial consumption, direct serial plus meal multiplied by 4. Now come to the alternative method, in which I used I have calculated indirect serial consumption taking per capita feed plus net import of meat multiplied by 4. This one is a graph. Here you are getting a larger variability with the high per capita real income, but you are not getting a non-linearity as we are getting in the earlier case. So what here I have done, I have run a only linear regression model, okay, and that one is a log-log linear regression model with the only panel data set. Okay. So again the slope coefficient is 0.16, same as before. R square, now you are getting a slightly lower R square, that one is overall is 0.57, earlier I think 0.66. But here you have a less number of observations, just 23332. That means there were only 106 countries. Earlier case were 128 countries. It is because there are several countries who seems like an outlier. So what I have done, I have removed all those outliers. If I include all those, of course I will not get a robust coefficient value, but in that case I will getting I will getting R square 0.48, overall 0.48. So even we, these are the interpretations of my regression result. Okay. So even we go with the all these finding, okay, then we can say that serial consumption, total serial consumption has a strong relationship with the real income, and given this strong relationship, serial consumptions can be used as a proxy for real income. Okay. So in this context, if you find that in a particular country or a group of country who have experienced a decline in serial consumption for vast section of population along with rise in conventionally measured real income, as we get in case of India, this implies that vast segment of population has also experienced a decline in real income, which cannot be captured through the conventional measure of real income, even it has increased for the country as a whole. Okay. But again here I like to emphasize that the calorie consumption is merely a one dimension of measuring poverty. Therefore, to measure poverty precisely, we must have to account for other dimensions too, like access to education, health, housing and leisure. Hence, rising calorie consumption for some particular period and for some particular segment of population do not necessarily imply that poverty has declined despite of increases in calorie consumption, as we evident in 2011-12 survey. These are the trend of calorie consumptions for the period 1993 to 2011-12. Here you look in 2011-12, we have an experience of rise in calorie consumptions across all decile. Okay. Even the in urban area, level of 2011-12 calorie consumption higher than 2004 and 5 survey year. A similar kind of result will get in a rural area too. Okay. This marks 8 and 4 say that 40% of urban people consuming higher per capita calorie intake as compared to the 93-94 level, and similarly here 80% of rural people consuming higher level of per capita calorie intake as compared to 2004 and 5 level. If you go with the percentage breakup of calorie intake over the food group, then how many minutes? 5 minutes. Cereal consumption, of course, cereal shares of profit calorie declining over a period of time, but there is a rise in calories calorie share from pulses, vegetables, meat, milk and other food items. This one, the same kind of result will similar kind of result will get in protein intake too, as the same one. This one is the percentage breakup. Again, you will get a similar kind of pattern as calorie consumption. Now the explanation of rising calories and protein intake. It's a rise in efficiency in implementation of PDS and midday meal scheme, rise in nutritional level. The study done by Himanshu and Sen. Manrega is one causes for this. Significant rise in both casual and regular ages, another causes of rise in calorie consumption. Third one is this one is the this hypothesis. This one is proposed by me only. People are working more in order to fulfill their basic needs. That may partly causes the increases in calorie consumption, particularly for people in lower income segment. This suggests that the decline in calorie consumption till 2009 and 10 was certainly not because of declining demand of calories. For it was, then it will be difficult to explain why people suddenly start consuming more calories in India. Therefore, it was probably of reduction of purchasing capacity due to rapid rise in expenditure of medical, education and conveyance, which squeezes the household budget and force them to spend less on food items and hence on calories. Thank you.
The last paper by Dr. Damayanti.
has happened to this one. It doesn't show properly. Ah, okay. Chair, members of the head table, and distinguished, my dear friends. So I'm going to present my paper on urban poverty. So multi-level analysis of urban poverty in evidence from Sri Lanka. So I'm Damayanti from University of Sri Jayawardhanapura, Sri Lanka. If I start from the background, so it is connected to urbanization. So the urbanization actually should be coupled with the formalization to reduce urban impoverishment. But what has happened, urbanization applies while formalization has slowed down. So because of that, urban poverty will be the prominent issue in coming decades. So with that renewed interest, so I will move to the poverty. So what is poverty? It is a multidimensional, multifaceted concept. So according to the scholars, it covers not only the income and expenditure aspects, but all the other factors related to human welfare. So it is a multidimensional concept, as I said. If so, it should be measured in a multidimensional way. And then the popular measures, they are monetary or nominal measures. So it includes only the thing in money terms. So it has inborn measurement errors with seasonal variation of prices and self-sufficient productions like that. So there are many measurement errors within the nominal measurements. And then poverty is again a multi-level concept. So we have to take into account contextual specific factors. That means the factors related to socio-economic and geographical background of the people, and then the individual specific factors. So that is what the factors related to household level, education level, income, employment status, and so on. So if it is the poverty is a multi-level concept, then we have to take into consideration both levels. And then most common sampling in this field is multi-stage cluster sampling for the purpose of reducing the cost. And therefore, there will be a specific data structure within that data set. So we have to take into consideration that factor also. And if I, stemming from that background, if I move into the situation, poverty situation in Sri Lanka, once we get into this head count ratio, the prominent nominal poverty measure in the country, so the statistics are shown here. It's giving us a very favorable picture. So then it is very favorable. Then because of this favorable picture, what has happened? So these are the things. So urban poverty is given less priority in the development agenda, and it is neglected, and then it has created a severe dearth of academic contribution. But what is the reality? These are the some of the outcomes. But what is the reality? So these are the issues behind that reality. Official poverty statistics. So as I told you, those are nominal statistics. It gives you the measurements that has been collected in money terms. So it shows a reduction in nominal poverty rates, but it has not considered the multi-dimensional aspects of poverty. So therefore, I expect nominal poverty statistics are seriously underestimated. And then these are the evidence. So the capital city of Sri Lanka, Colombo, is the most urbanized district in the country. So although it has the lowest headcount ratio, it is the district that has lower HDI rank and also lowest dietary intakes, and there are severe poverty pockets exist even within the Colombo district, and also more than 50% of urban population dwells in slums and shanties. And then the other issue, poverty surveys at the national level, those are multi-stage cluster sampling. So we expect there will be a nested data structure within that data, then therefore there may be an error violating ordinary least squares assumption independence of errors. So I expect in the research or in published papers, I expect they have done these mistakes. And then the other factor, as I told you at the beginning, poverty is a multi-level concept. Therefore, the multi-level factors will be affected. So the interdependence and the interaction of these multi-level factors will be impact on poverty simultaneously. But most of the studies are single level and also descriptive. Therefore, within these studies, there will be a methodological issue. And then from those issues, the significance, why I look into this multi-level and multi-dimensional poverty. So, as pointed out Tudue 2001, so there will be a incorrected policy interventions because of this income and consumption data criteria based on income and consumption criteria only, and does not take into account other deprivation. That means the multiple deprivations of poverty cannot be represented by the unidimensional monetary measures. So therefore, we have to consider the multidimensional aspects of poverty. So for the correct policy targeting, and then the multi-level effects. So some policies actually can be implemented well at national or the regional level, while other policies can be implemented at household, community or village level. So to do that, we have to have that correct discrimination. So here to have that policy decision, we have to have multi-level analysis. And then they have stressed the need of disaggregated level studies. So to contribute to this gap, so just I will show you what is available, and then so they have some of the publishers, researchers, they have pointed out there are some contextual factors that has impact on poverty. So they have pointed out macro policies such as monetary, fiscal and trade policies, and other infrastructural development, and also agro input supplies. All those factors are contextual factors. They have impact on poverty. And the other side, they have pointed out, most of these studies, they have pointed out individual level factors like household, socio-economic and community factors. And also from these 2 points, the gap is indicated here. So all those studies, the base, they have taken into consideration the monetary measures, and also all of them are single level studies, and they have not gone beyond the descriptive statistics, and that means they have not quantified the impact. And then just to fill those gaps, I am presenting this paper. To fill that gap, only 5 minutes? Okay, then the objectives actually to explore urban poverty and they quantify, specifically quantify the factors. The methodology, sample and data preparation is here. So I have taken the household income and expenditure survey done by Department of Census and Statistics, and we have taken 2 levels, level 1 and level 2. Level 1 is district level, and the level 1 household level and level 2 as the district level. So the data preparation have been done using SPSS and Stata 11.0, and these are the models. These are multi-level models, require series of modeling, null and base model, individual model, and also the full model. So these are the model I have estimated, and these are the variables, so dependent variables for the requirements of 2 types of model, multi-level mixed model and multi-level logistic models. First one is the multidimensional assessment score. It was created using principal component analysis. So first unrotated factor, it covers 14% of total variation. It was used as the multidimensional assessment score to the multi-level mixed model, and by taking the 14th percentile as the threshold, the binary variable was created for the multi-level logistic model, and the nominal poverty line was used to measure the nominal poverty. And then the independent variables, as usual, demographic, household, household size, ethnicity, education, employment, and so on. And then at the contextual level, percentage of female labor force participation, and the other variables as shown in the slide, including share of own account workers and non-agricultural informal workers, and so on. So here are the results, uncontrolled results, that means the descriptive level results. So to take these results, all the other impacts are not controlled, therefore there will be a mixture of impacts here. So as shown here, criterion variable, that is the main dependent variable, it shows it very diverse across the district, and then these are some of the uncontrolled dependent variables, distribution of poor household level by education. It shows low educators are poor, and then the private sector workers and on account workers are poor, and then the assessed, those who have credit access, they are less likely to be poor. And here the results of uncontrolled results, that means multi-level model results. So before that, I have checked the robustness of the models. So it shows the data, nested data structure, and from that model, from that statistics, you saw here 10.3 and 14.4 is the value of the variance partition coefficient, shows average 11.7% variation of poverty attributed to contextual level. And then demographic factors, so they are marital status, age of the household, and head of family size. Those factors are they have actually very least coefficient but significant. So taking okay, yeah, positive association between age and access, and being a male, being a married reduces the poverty, and the high level of education reduces the risk of being in poverty. And then the findings, employment, again related to employment category. So it shows that being a government or semi-government worker would reduce the risk of being poor, while being on account worker or private sector worker, they are comparatively poor, and women are comparatively poor, and also at the contextual level, so female labor force participation prominent in reducing poverty, that is the most compounding factor And then the other significant factors are percentage of service sector employment and magnitude of the agriculture sector. So from that findings, there are several implications. First thing is to urban poverty should be addressed in a multilateral way rather than focusing on one level. And the other thing is nested data structure is present here. So therefore, using of ordinary least squares for the analysis will not be correct, will not be a correct method. Therefore, the methodological issue should be corrected. And then the demographic policies, that means female-headed families should be further developed or defined. The policy should be formed. And then the education, basically primary education is not sufficient. Related other empowerment policies should be formed. And then special attention should be focused on private sector workers to improve their fringe benefits and wages and other things. And then the on account workers, government has to do something to regulate their income. And also once we consider the agricultural sector, so it is not a conclusion here, those who are involved in agriculture have high risk of being poor, but the thing is those people who are in the agriculture, their standard of living is low, then government has to do something to increase their standard of living. Then some of the factors have been pointed out here. High volatility of prices, seasonal variations of market focus, exploitation and wastage and of the harvest to maintain the standard of living and so on. And the attention to optimize money management and guarantee micro business at the minimum livelihood. Why it is not working? What has happened? Something has happened. Why it is not coming? Yeah, I just want my final slide. Yeah, the last one. Last slide, yes. What has happened? Oh. Yeah, I will not do anything. Yeah. Yeah, this is the last one. Yeah. So this is the limitations of my research. Actually, some inclusive variables, those variables are not available at disaggregated level. Therefore, I haven't included the proportion of government expenditure, health and infrastructure expenditures, and private contribution on education and so on. Those variables should be included in a comprehensive analysis. And then at household level, number of wage earners, disability persons, like that I didn't include. And also comprehensive rural sector poverty analysis can be done. So those are limitations of my research, and this is the first study under multi-level modeling. So therefore this study should be replicated actually, and then the panel studies can be corrected. So that is my presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay, we have two discussants. May I now request Dr. Arindam Banerjee?
Thanks to the chair. I have two papers to discuss. The first is the one on the functioning of the PDS and its impact on nutrition in the KBK region in Orissa, and the second one on the microfinance paper. So I'll start with the first one. I think this study on the impact on nutrition of the PDS functioning that's been done for the KBK region is significant for a number of reasons. First, the time period of the study is significant because this is a time period where you have a revival of the PDS, but it is also a time period when 2004 to 2011 is a period where you find is marked by high cereal inflation in the country, so in the open markets, particularly from 2007 onwards. And also it is significant because if you look at the longer nutritional intake data for the country, I think which came out in Krishna's paper, you have a break in a very long trend which can be observed from say something around 1983 of declining calorie intakes. You find that there is some increase in calorie intakes in 2011-12. So this revival of the PDS again largely depends on, I mean, it seems to be driven by two factors. One is which you have pointed out in the paper, is the change in the stance with regard to food subsidy of several states like Chhattisgarh, Orissa, Tamil Nadu, where they have partly or entirely universalized the PDS, but also driven by the high food inflation, where people are returning to or becoming more and more dependent on the public distribution system. In this respect, a very minor comment that I have for the paper is that you can probably bring in some of these national longer trends of the national context, state-wise comparison, and then fit in or look at where Orissa lies. I mean, whether Orissa or the KBK region is something which is a special case, or whether there are similar trends emerging in other parts of the country. I mean, that can enrich the paper. The other set of comments, I think the study is significant. If we look at the results of the study, you find there is a marked increase in the energy intakes or the nutritional indicators, whether you take calories, protein or fats, for the APL population or the non-BPL population in the KBK region. And that points to the fact, I mean, something which has been discussed several times. People, I mean, several scholars have pointed it out in different ways, that the official poverty lines do not really reflect, are too low, are underestimations, and do not really have been able to maintain that linkage with the question of food deprivation and all of that. And that's where you see that APL population, which I mean comes back to the PDS in a big way. Particularly, I mean, it's very stark in a region like KBK, but probably you'll find it some of these trends even in other regions which are not so. The other significance, I think, as far as this assessment of the universalization of PDS is concerned, and that significance, I think, lies in the light of the recent high-level committee for restructuring and reorienting the role of the Food Corporation of India. The kind of recommendations that they make, I mean, again, there's a whole range of recommendations which seem disparate at some point, but there is some underlying logic which binds the different recommendations from decentralizing procurement, focusing on newer states, and then you find at the end on the recommendations on replacing the public distribution system by cash transfers and all of that. I don't want to go into all of that, but if we just simply focus on the recommendations with regard to the National Food Security Act that the HLC has come out with, I mean, again, the coverage is reduced, again, bringing back that focus on BPL, and so that's basically a reverse direction of what has been actually happening on the ground at the level of the states. And if you look at the kind the prices which have been recommended, the issue prices, the recommendation regarding the issue prices for the BPL category, again, you find that it's significantly increasing. I mean, the BPL allocation has been increased from 5 kilograms to 7 kilograms. Again, this is only at the level of recommendations compared to what is actually there in the NFSA. But it comes at a higher price as per the recommendations, because it's to be linked at 50% of the MSP and all of that. So I did some rough calculation. The price of each kilogram of allocation actually goes up by something like more than 200%. So, I mean, therefore, again, in those context of that the thinking that's coming from the HLC, this paper can contribute to the policy discourse in that way. Coming to the second paper, again, there are two kinds of findings that come out from this paper. One is, I mean, with linking it with the commercialization, you say that there is one finding is that the average loan size is increasing, which essentially represents that the MFIs are moving away from the poor. And on the other hand, as far as the gender dimension is concerned, or you're using the gender dimension as a measurement of how much they're serving or how much poor oriented the MFIs are, and there you find that the female clients, the share of female clients have gone up. Now, question that arises, I mean, while we have these findings, how do you reconcile these two in terms of what really is happening as far as class and gender is concerned? I mean, in the sense that if you are having more female clients, but at the same time you are moving away from the poor, so what is really happening? And I think one needs to look at several other factors in order to explain that. And two things immediately come to my mind upon reading the paper and listening to the presentation. One is, I mean, what's happening to the size of the self-help groups is, of course, one important question. Is it is the MFIs dealing with larger self-help groups, or what is really happening on that account? The other thing that comes to my mind is when we are tracking these MFIs, I think there were 69 or 63 MFIs in the data set. What's happened to the size of capital of these MFIs over time, and which might also explain to some extent why the loan size is becoming larger. Now, having said that, I think there are other problems of as far as MFIs are concerned, and their impact on poverty is concerned, or in terms of, I mean, as a credit institutions, and that doesn't come in the paper, but I just want to draw attention to this. Is that I mean, microfinance typically is characterized again by small size of loans, which are also for short term and often with higher interest rates. And I mean, the issue that needs to be looked at here is what kind of activities do microfinance loans really finance? I mean, go into. I mean, if there is, I mean, if it goes into an activity which perhaps grows at generates a rate of return of say 3, 4, 5%, and if the rate of interest annually, although it's done on a short term, but annually is something around say 20 to 25%, which is typically the case with microfinance institutions. There can be exceptions. Then where is that interest being paid from? I mean, where are the poor women or poor men or whoever is accessing these microfinance loans? It appears that again, with high rates of recovery of MFIs which gets reported, it's probably in some sense these self-help groups, this is because it goes into self-employed categories, and you don't have a objective wage component in the value addition that happens. It's probably only by devaluing one's labor or reducing one's return to one's labor that you are probably able to pay these high interest rates. So that, therefore, I mean, while you look at the question of average loan size or the reach of the microfinance loans, what it really does in transforming the lives or productivity or the production structure at the ground level is something that requires more engagement with these kind of questions. So I'll leave it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Banerjee. Now may I request Dr. Himangshu.
Thank you, Professor Panda. Let me start with Damayanti's paper, which is on Sri Lanka's urban poverty. It is now becoming more and more obvious, and most countries are also talking about multidimensional measurement of poverty. And there are attempts in India also, there are attempts in other South Asian countries also. But I think the paper that you are talking about is basically about looking at the household level variables and looking at the variables which are at the macro level, which is at the region specific and others. And it is not so much as the measurement of poverty that we are bothered about, but also about the factors which are important in terms of poverty alleviation. And your criticism in that sense of the money metric poverty line and being it's underestimated is fairly valid. I mean, that's nothing, because simply because when you're using a multidimensional index, you're not using any normative cutoff. You are using a cutoff which is 40%, which is an arbitrary cutoff that you're using. On the other hand, when you're using a money-metric poverty line, that poverty line comes from some norms which are hidden behind, and that is why the differences that you see. It is not because of the money versus the assets that is becoming the big difference in that. So you spend a lot of time on that. But I think the key issue that you're talking about is that in terms of the covariates of what determines poverty, there are obviously the household level variables, and there are variables which are region specific, what you call as the district variables, and also the macro variables. Obviously you're not talking about any monetary, fiscal and other policies, but talking about generally the characteristics which are averages of the regions, in the sense the district level things. And your suggestion finally comes out is that you should focus on the household level variables more, simply because the district level variables, the variation explained by them is much lower than what is in terms of the household variables. If I have understood it correctly, then I think I have only two comments to make in one sense. In any kind of an exercise like this, where the indices themselves are constructed by aggregates using this kind of PC kind of an approach, you'll find very high correlations between those and the poverty outcomes which are designed on the basis of that. But in any case, even if you use the money metric poverty line or any other poverty line, the between component is always lower than the within component. You'll always find the within component to be much higher than the between component. So what you're getting as a between component is much lower, which you are attributing as to lower variation in the regional, is in a sense being driven by the, I mean, more or less you'll find it in cross-section data, and your is a cross-section data that you are talking about. But one last comment, that is that you are talking that there are two important variables. One is education, which is becoming a very, very important part of it. And the second is the employment level, variables, which is that if you are in government or semi-government, then you are better off. But if you are self-employed or in private work, in a sense, then you are worse off and you are more likely to be poor. But again, these are not compartmentalized individual variables versus macro variables. Your access or ability to access jobs of a particular nature, or your ability to be in agriculture or move out of agriculture, are also linked to your macro policies. So these are not as much as household variables that you try and put together. Your access is not a choice that you make. It's also related to the macro variables, your situation, the sectoral distribution of economy, the government policies and those things. So in a sense, what you need is a combination of various policies to take care of the kind of poverty that you're talking about. And I think one of the important points that you're talking about is the clusterization or the ghettoization, or the kind of aggregation of poor in certain sectors in the urban areas. In urban poverty, that is particularly a problem, much different from the rural poverty where it is much more widespread. On Ram's paper, I mean, Ram, I have heard your paper earlier also, and therefore you know my comments. I only have to make two comments. One is related to your income data and that you're linking with the FAO cereal consumption. I think somewhere, and you do mention it in one footnote and somewhere very briefly, that you do distinguish between direct consumption of cereals and the indirect consumption of cereals. And you do accept the fact that the direct consumption of cereals declines as income go up, even in other countries. I mean, that is something which is there. Your is valid only in the case of total consumption of cereals, where you multiply the meat with the other things. And again, you agree, which is that it's a non-linear relationship. It tapers off at some point of time and it starts declining in that sense. When you're using that data with the FAO and FAO data, you're using all other countries' data, did you check the India data? What is happening to calories as far as the India data is concerned? As far as I remember, the calorie data in the FBS balance sheet of the FAO still shows an upward rising curve, and it shows roughly 250 increase in calories by the same data that you're using. So in that sense, the India story is not incompatible if you're using the same data source. And that is something which I had mentioned to you earlier also. Roughly 250 calories increase is being shown by, and it's very, very consistent with that information. The difference or the contradiction that comes in is simply because you're using the NSS consumption data of calories and then trying to link it with the issue of income, whether the decline in calories is the one which is a defining factor or basically as evidence of declining real incomes in the country. And I think on these, again, you know my comments on these issues. I'll just make clarification that one has to be very careful in interpreting this, the declining calorie level of it. And the reason why you dismiss this 2009 to 2011 data is also the reason why the previous conclusion can be dismissed by that. It is not that the improvement in income happened only between 2009 and 2011. I'll not get into the detail. It is not that the wages start rising after 2009. It is not that employment situation improves only after 2009, or agriculture started improving only after 2009. And therefore, the calorie increase between 2009 and 2011 is very fine, but the calorie decline before that means that all other variables were moving in the opposite direction. And these 2 years have suddenly become like a... So this is something where you have to be very careful in using one data and trying to come to a conclusion and saying that income is the one which is basically being derived by what is happening to it. And remember, if you look at 93 onwards also, the bottom deciles particularly, the calorie consumption is not been falling. In fact, the lowest decline, the calorie decline has not happened. It is the top ones which are going down. And does it basically, then you are meaning to say that the bottom 20% of the population actually has not seen any decline in real income, but it is only the top which has gone in, and therefore the inequality should have come down. I don't think you are arguing that. So I think don't go into that. And I've already talked about the measurement issues. There are a huge amount of issues related to measurement data, and jumping to a big conclusion and saying that calories are the one which are basically the real evidence of why incomes have gone down and real income has gone down, and any other alternative explanation in terms of saying that there is less requirement of calories and others is not correct. I think there's too much of taking a very strong position on these issues, and one has to be very careful in coming to those conclusions. I think also one should be careful about, because talking about the RDAs, the recommended dietary allowance, and that is where Professor Panda was talking about, that the older RDAs were different from the current RDA that is being used, particularly in the Rangarajan committee. So there is something, and which is the fact that there was different RDA in, even in 73, 74 we are using it, urban and rural, you had 2400 and 2100. It does mean that the norms are different from rural and urban areas. You cannot have a constant norm over a period of time and say that there has been no real improvement in. But the point that you have missed out, where Andalib's point comes out, is that after 2004-5, when you start seeing a increase, forget about 2009-10, if you compare between 2004-5 to 2011-12, all the states have seen an increase in calorie consumption, except for Gujarat and one more state. Gujarat is the big outlier in that sense, which has seen a decline in the calorie consumption. That has happened. A large part of that is because of the PDS and the midday meal, which is where he's talking about, that it is leading to higher more and more people accessing the PDS. The percentage of population which are accessing PDS has gone up. The average amount being paid for consuming the PDS rice has gone down dramatically. And in spite of all that advance, which you somewhere mark in one line, is a very strong reason why people are accessing more and more calories, more and more cereals. And overall average calorie consumption may have still been higher, but you see that that is happening in all the, particularly in the middle ones, where the decline has been arrested. There is no longer a large decline happening between the, as far as the calorie decline is concerned. So I think you should not jump at big conclusions and come to these conjectures, more or less like, so your paper started with that, you had the second and third objective explaining why the suddenly calories have improved in India. At the end of it, you have just 2 lines to say that it is happening because everything is turning good after 2009-10. May not be the right way of dealing with the problem. One has to be careful in dealing with that. And look at PDS and MDM and also accept that these are factors which are as important, the supply side problems are as important as the problem that you are talking about. So the truth is somewhere in between. It is not this or that. One should accept that. That's my suggestion to you.
Yeah, thank you, Himangsu. Now the floor is open for discussion, and maybe about 15 minutes. After that, we can give few minutes to the paper writers again to respond.
My question is with third presenter, Krishna. So you have taken the direct cereal, indirect cereal, and indirect cereal you include meat. Did you include milk also? And if not, why? Then second thing, that you have made a statement that cereal consumption has a strong relation with real income. Can you conclude in the case of India also? Because your analysis is cross country. Because in our country, it is not just only income, it is with food habit also. Like we can compare in Gujarat and Kerala. Gujarat people eat more milk. In Kerala, they eat more rice. And is there any substitution between the cereal consumption, direct and indirect? It might be that people are more substituting from direct cereal to meat, which is indirect cereal in your analysis. That's
Yeah, please.
I have one question to Krishna, that when you're discussing about this calorie consumption puzzle, there I have one question like, in recent times you are finding there is some little bit increase in the calorie norms, and previously it was declining. So this declining and increasing, is it due to by choice or by inadequacy? What is your answer for that? Like, is it due to choice that people are consuming, like changing their food habits, or is it due to inadequacy, means changing their, I think, in lower in growth of their income? And second, what is your view regarding this calorimetric and monimetric poverty norm? That is my first. And my second question to Rehman, when you're discussing about this undernourishment and this universal food security in KBK districts, so what can you tell what is the like proportion of people undernourished by taking this calorie norm in the KBK districts? What is the like number percentage of undernourished people by taking this required dietary allowance?
I think we'll collect few more questions.
Thank you, Dr. Panda. Syed Hassan from South Asian University. A couple of remarks on the couple of papers. On the MFI paper, as the discussants mentioned, the loan size can be misleading. You need to normalize that in some way or other, right? Now, of course, your data is not household data. One of the normalization would be the age of the MFI. You know, new MFIs have new members, and they usually start off with low loans, and they graduate, so to speak, so with experience. And the same poor person, not that poor anymore, and will now be entitled to have a larger loan. So you need to normalize according to this issue. And at the same time, the asset proportion position of the household changes. So you need to normalize again by the asset, which is sort of related to the first two parts. And also, the loan is often utilized by more than one member in the household, and the one often can normalize again by the number of adult members in the household. So the measurement of what the loan size is, and the familiar issues about the size and productivity and all that in different literatures are relevant here. So you need to normalize the measurement of the variable has to be more accurate than it appears to be. Of course, you're constrained by the mixed market data. That may be a compromising element. The other remark is about the last paper about the poverty in Sri Lanka. Poverty rate is very low, so you need to find out what can you say about poverty not being so low, which is a novel way of doing it. But can you do some sort of stress testing, like a vulnerability analysis? Find out if what percent of households, urban households, who are really, even take any measure, monetary or more general measure, say can they withstand 2-week loss of jobs? What are the main source of employment? If the employment is gone for 2 weeks, can they sustain that? Can they still be poor, non-poor in that context? Or if they have health shock of some sort of a catastrophic type where they incur certain expenditure, there are norms on that regard. So stress testing, kind of a financial market term, which is another way of measuring vulnerability. Vulnerability would be a useful thing to do for a country that is sort of slowly losing its poor. Thank you.
Any other question? Yeah, any other? Otherwise, you will ask the authors to respond.
So on the percentage of people undernourished in KBK districts, I know it's quite large. The exact figure I don't remember, I'm sorry. I can share that with you. There in the
Yeah.
Very, very high.
I start with the first question. With the first question, whether milk has been included into a
Krishna, it's not
direct
working.
consumption.
Mike, please.
Yeah, fine. Thank you, sir. Whether milk has included into in calculation of indirect real consumption. And I say here milk has not been included into calculation of indirect real consumption. I have just taken meat, per capita meat consumption used as a food in calculation of indirect cereal consumption. The second one is whether in case of India, total cereal consumption is related with real income or not. So I like to mention here in case of India, there is a decline in total cereal consumption along with rise of real income. But my basic argument is that if you take a finding on the at the different country level, okay, as I have used 128 country, okay, and this 128 country is not a arbitrary selection. It is a non-arbitrarily because in construction of panel data set, I reduced to 128 country. So my basic argument is what hold for the country aggregate should be hold for the in the case of India also. If it not hold, then something must be happening wrong with the India, which have need to account for. And I'm agree that FAO data set has their own limitation. There are many flow of FAO data set, particularly when we take a data set of feed. Okay, but again I'm saying calorie consumption in one hand and total cereal consumption in other hand. In case of India, total calorie consumption is declining again with the FAO data. But when you look at calorie consumption, then FAO data set shows a rising trend of calorie consumption. As you must, I have gone through this one. Of course, there are several explanations for rising calorie consumptions in 2011-12. Of course, I have missed to look out 2009 and 10. Himanshu sir was right. There is a various positive thing happen after 2005 and 6, which may causes a rise in calorie consumption. The one is the contribution of PDS. But again, a basic instinct question is why people go for PDS? Why they want food from PDS? Of course, because they are poor. Somewhere they compelled to buy food from PDS, even then they are getting a lower quantity of, lower in quality of food from PDS. So it is my basic instinct. Why I go for PDS? Why not I go to market to buy the better quality food? Of course, when I do not have a substantial income to spend all my needs, all in this food needs and non-food needs both include. Of course, somewhere my income is huge. I put to spend on education, on health, on conventions, so that I will get a less income to spend on food. So I look for a PDS. If I get a rice from PDS, that will feed my stomach. So somewhere we must have to look real income in poverty calculations. All we agree with this. There are several studies how the real income, conventional measure of real income fail to measure poverty. Of course, because of problem of price indexes. Of course, my own knowledge has, I do not have much knowledge on this. I'm young in this area, so I do not say much. There are experts, many experts. Several of them are my teacher. I think I will teach you. The second thing is whether cereal consumption and the substitution between cereal to non-cereal items. Of course, in post-level, substitution between direct cereal and indirect cereal consumption. Of course, there is a substitution. When income grows, people move to a non-cereal item like meat, fish, milk. Okay. In 2011-12 surveys, what I found, there is a substantial rise in consumption of pulses. Okay, both in quantity level and across this side. And maybe because a rise in consumption of pulses, there is not only a rise in consumption of pulses, there is a rise in consumption of fruits, meat. Of course, there is a very marginal rise in consumption of meat. May all these together causes a rise in calorie consumption, of course. But ultimately, you have to look behind, real income to make any conclusion in this regard. The second one question is money metric poverty calculation and calorie based poverty calculation. Of course, there are various flow of money metric measure of poverty. And of course, again I am saying calorie based measuring of measuring poverty on the only on the basis of calorie norm is not an inappropriate way to measure poverty, because it is only a one dimension. It is only a one dimension. To measure poverty, you must have to look the other dimensions. As Raj had presented in the inaugural lecture, like there is a sanitation sector, there are education sector, there are a health sector, which must have to account to measure poverty.
Yeah, Tariq, do you have anything to say?
I think there is one question related to my paper that I should use normalized variables. So I already use normalized average loan size. It is normalized by GDP of that country. Okay, so that inter-country comparison is valid. So I already use. No, but the data is at institution level. No. The normalization is, I think, by he's suggesting that I should normalize by household level. Is microfinance institution.
By the extent.
There was one problem that we can't compare inter-country, we can't conduct inter-country comparison of average loan size. So that's why I divided that variable by GDP, so that we can make inter-country comparison simply for that purpose. I don't think there is any other reason to normalize that variable further. And as far as Arindam sir is concerned, the size of the group may be one variable in the model. I think the data is not available. I was looking from the mixed market and various other sources. Data of size of group is not available, so that's why I have not used that. The next is impact evaluation and targeting efficiency. Basically, these two works are different. So I am working on targeting efficiency, then I am also working on impact evaluation. But impact evaluation is totally different work. For that we need micro level data of client. So there we use client level data. And in targeting efficiency, we can assess targeting efficiency at institution level by using institutional level data. So these two works are different.
Yeah, Damayanti madam, do you have anything? Yeah. Okay, any other question? We still have couple of minutes, but otherwise I think, yeah, we'll close it at then. Sorry, is there anything? Or no, I think, broadly, I'll not speak on the papers, I'll speak in general that the issue of poverty is taking different shape in different policy regimes. And if we want some kind of long-term action from the government, it cannot be just broad. It cannot be left that everything changes from one government to the other. There has to be some kind of broad consensus, at least on not necessarily on every instrument, but 3 or 4 major instruments, and also it will help to reduce poverty if there is also a kind of broad agreement that as you are having more growth, at least 3 or 4% of GDP could be devoted towards direct poverty alleviation programs. I'm talking in terms of not just food or employment, but overall at least the ones that will affect the welfare of the people more directly. Can we spend at least 3 or 4% of GDP? I think that kind of consensus, if the political class can have, will possibly be moving towards quicker reduction, or if not quicker reduction, at least a quicker, somewhat welfare increase among the lower section of the people. Right now, in any market-driven growth process, inequality rise, possibly we must take it for granted that there will be some rise in inequality. At times it could be more. And how do we, and also the possibilities of employment generation, despite all the talk, one is not very certain to what extent we will be able to actually employ most of the unemployed or potentially unemployed. Given that, can also the the academicians also, can they contribute little bit on direct poverty alleviation versus employment programs, for example, or employment generation through the growth process. Can we do that? To what extent actually we can go ahead in some of these things? What are the potentials? I see that as a major kind of potential research which will have impact on poverty. One concern, for example, NREGA has the employment guarantee program that India started about 10 years ago, that has fairly big impact on several sections of the people. If you go to villages, one can see the impact if you are going into and studying the labor market in the villages. But at the same time, one concern some of the people raised is it becoming the employment of the last resort, or it is actually substituting some of the things? These are again some of the new areas that one might like to work on. But overall, I think reconciling growth and distribution, it requires kind of statecraft, and it is here that in actual field how much of impact will be there in practice. It will basically depend on the political commitment of the leadership. That possibly I will say that it is here, if we can have some kind of consensus, and also now that several other welfare programs possibly will be shifted to states, particularly in the Indian context, will they be actually be spending on some of these things? That is becoming a big question. And if there are, eventually possibly there will be pressure, in democratic pressure will be there. But if in the next 3-4 years, if they don't do that, then again, the progress will be stalled to that extent. I think these are some of the concerns I'll raise in the Indian context. Dr. Sen, will you have anything to say? Any observation? Yeah, then thank you. Then we'll bring it to a close.
May I quickly make a few important announcements? Lunch is served outside, but you need a lunch coupon for that. I think most participants, when you got that folder, you would have a lunch coupon inside. If you don't have one, our student volunteers are standing just outside. Please collect one on your way out. The second thing about reimbursements, we'll be starting that after the lunch session, so just after this chaos is over a bit. And certificates for participants in this session, it's available in our registration desk. And we'll start in exactly 45 minutes, so dot at 2 we start with the next session. Thank you.